Some mysteries vanish, but some linger like ghosts in America's memory, echoing through decades with a silence more chilling than the crime itself. America loves its mysteries, but there are some that never quite make the front page, never dominate the talk shows, never find their way into Hollywood thrillers. They sit quietly in the background, gathering dust in police archives and whispered only by those who refuse to forget. Yet, among these shadows, one story stands taller, stranger, and more heartbreaking than most. It is the story of a little boy found in Philadelphia in 1957, a boy without a name, a boy abandoned in a cardboard box, a boy who would come to be called America's unknown child. And while most Americans have heard of names like JonBenet Ramsey or the Lindbergh baby, very few know about him. But maybe that's what makes this story even more haunting, the fact that America let him fade, the fact that his story, 60 years later, still leaves us with no answers, no closure, no peace. It began in February of 1957, on a cold, gray day in Fox Chase, a quiet neighborhood in northeast Philadelphia. The fields were bare, the air sharp, the kind of day when nothing much was supposed to happen. A young man was checking his muskrat traps in a wooded area along Susquehanna Road. Instead of an animal, he stumbled across a large cardboard box. It was the kind you might expect to see behind a department store, a box that had once held a bassinet from J.C. Penney. He opened it, and there, wrapped in a thin blanket, was the body of a small boy. Naked, bruised, hair crudely chopped, and discarded like yesterday's trash. The boy was between 4 and 6 years old. He weighed barely 30 pounds. He had been beaten, starved, and broken in ways too brutal for words. And from that moment forward, the city of Philadelphia, the police, and the nation were pulled into a mystery that has never been solved. The first reports described him in detail: light brown hair, fair skin, deep bruises across his small body. His hair looked as though someone had tried to shave it off hurriedly, leaving behind jagged clumps. His nails had been clipped, suggesting someone cared just enough to trim him, but not enough to keep him alive. There were small scars and markings that hinted at long-term abuse, not just one night of horror. The blanket he was wrapped in was cheap and worn. The box itself was traced back to a store, but thousands of identical boxes had been sold across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. No one could narrow it down. The police expected an immediate identification. Surely, someone would come forward. A mother. A father. A neighbor. A teacher. A relative. A missing child report from somewhere in the region. But the days passed, then weeks, then months, and nothing. No family. No one who knew him. No one to claim his body. He became simply the boy in the box. And America, a nation that loves to talk about family values and protecting children, failed him in life and in death. Investigators went door to door, carrying photographs, sketches, and descriptions. They searched orphanages, hospitals, and missing children reports. They even dressed him in a suit and propped him up for post-mortem photographs, hoping someone might recognize him if they saw him alive. Thousands of flyers were distributed. His face was printed in newspapers across Philadelphia. Leads poured in, but all led nowhere. Over the decades, theories surfaced. Some said he had been a foster child who fell victim to abuse. Others whispered that he was sold, traded, or kidnapped. One woman claimed her abusive mother had taken in the boy, tortured him, and then killed him, but her story fell apart under scrutiny. Every lead collapsed into disappointment. No fingerprints matched. No missing child database produced results. He was too anonymous, too lost in the system. Even the blanket he was wrapped in, a distinctive pattern, led nowhere. But here's where the story becomes even more devastating, and where modern ears in America should take pause. The Boy in the Box is not just a story about one child, it is a mirror, a reflection of how easily some lives in America can slip through the cracks. This boy was alive once. He played, cried, maybe laughed. He had a voice. And yet, When he was beaten, abandoned, and discarded, there was no system to catch him, no community to rally, no family to step up. His life was erased quietly, and America, for all its wealth and power, for all its proclamations of being a land of freedom and opportunity, did not notice. He was not missed, because in some ways, America did not want to see him. Today, we live in an age of modern forensics, DNA genealogy, digital databases, international cooperation. We solve 50-year-old cold cases with a speck of blood or a trace of saliva. Names have been given to unidentified victims once thought lost forever. And yet, for the boy in the box, the breakthroughs have come slowly, painfully. It was only recently that genetic genealogy produced a potential name, but even that is shrouded in doubt and silence, with authorities reluctant to announce until every detail is confirmed. Imagine, a child lost in 1957 may only just now, in the age of smartphones and TikTok, be given his rightful name. That gap, that delay, says something chilling about America's priorities and failures. What makes this case different from many others is not just the brutality but the absence of closure. With most crimes, there is a suspect, a trial, a conviction, or at least a narrative of justice pursued. But here, we have nothing but a box, a blanket, and a boy. And this absence is its own crime. It forces us to ask questions we don't want to ask. How many children, even today, live and die without being truly seen? How many live in abusive homes that neighbors ignore? How many pass through foster systems where paperwork replaces human care? How many disappear every year in America, with cases that barely make local news? The boy in the box was buried in a potter's field at first, his grave marked only with the words, "Unknown Child." For years, no flowers, no visitors, no mourners. It wasn't until decades later, when a group of Philadelphia residents raised money, that he was reburied with a proper headstone that reads, "America's Unknown Child." A haunting tribute, but also an indictment. America, the richest nation on earth, allowed one of its children to go nameless, faceless, voiceless. And yet, his story lingers because it forces us to wrestle with uncomfortable truths. America has always struggled with the invisible, the poor, the marginalized, the abused, the immigrant, the voiceless. We talk about liberty and justice for all, but for some children, justice never arrives. The Boy in the Box is not just a crime story, it is a parable about what happens when a society looks away, when empathy is selective, when children become collateral damage to poverty, secrecy, or shame. Think of this, in today's America, we share missing child alerts in seconds. We have social media campaigns, viral hashtags, and nationwide Amber Alerts. And still, thousands of children vanish each year. Still, unidentified remains surface in woods, rivers, and deserts. The Boy in the Box is not just history, it is prophecy, warning us that if we don't care enough, the nameless will keep piling up. Technology can help, but technology cannot replace human compassion. What do we learn, then, from this haunting story? We learn that justice delayed is not always justice denied, it is justice erased. We learn that silence kills as much as violence does. We learn that the measure of a nation is not in its wealth, or its armies, or its skyscrapers, but in how it remembers its most vulnerable, how it fights for them, how it refuses to let them disappear. And maybe that is why, even today, so many are drawn back to this case. It is not because we love horror or mystery. It is because deep down, we hope for redemption. We hope that one day, America's unknown child will no longer be unknown. That his name will be spoken. That his story will remind us all that children are never disposable. For now, though, the boy remains in the shadows. The cardboard box is gone, the blanket long decayed, the investigators all aged or dead. But the questions remain, echoing through time. Who was he? Who failed him? Who buried their guilt along with his body? And will America ever have the courage to give him the justice he deserved, not just for him, but for every child who has been made invisible? The Boy in the Box is not just a cold case. It is America's conscience, waiting, pleading, haunting us until we decide that no child, no matter how forgotten, will ever be left in the dark again. The first days of the investigation carried a strange mix of urgency and silence. Police officers stood in the bitter February wind, their breath visible as they searched the scene. They photographed the box, the blanket, the boy. They noted every bruise, every cut, every mark on his tiny body. Yet what haunts anyone who studies this case is not just the brutality, it's the contradictions. His fingernails were neatly trimmed, his hair had been freshly chopped, almost shaved, though clumsily. It was as if someone cared just enough to prepare him for burial, but not enough to keep him alive. Was this love twisted into violence? Or cruelty disguised as care? Every detail deepened the mystery. The Philadelphia police went public almost immediately. Newspapers carried his image. Flyers were printed by the thousands. His body was photographed in an attempt to capture some resemblance of life, and those images were circulated with desperate hope that someone would recognize him. In an America of the 1950s, where neighbors knew each other's children, where communities were closer, it seemed impossible that no one would claim him. Yet days passed. Weeks turned into months. The boy had no name. He had no family stepping forward. He had only the box and the bruises to tell his story. False leads began to trickle in. At first, investigators considered the most obvious explanations. Perhaps he had been abandoned by a poor family unable to feed him, or perhaps he had run afoul of an abusive parent. But then theories became stranger, darker, almost desperate. One theory centered on a foster home not far from where the boy was found. Residents in the area whispered about children treated harshly there. Some claimed the boy resembled those seen in the home. Investigators searched, questioned, and watched closely. Yet the evidence collapsed. Nothing could be proven. Another lead came from a woman who, years later, insisted that her abusive mother had purchased or taken in the boy, subjected him to unspeakable cruelty, and finally killed him. For a moment, it seemed like the truth was finally within reach. But the story twisted, details didn't align, and investigators concluded it was unreliable. For every hopeful lead, there were 10 dead ends. The bassinet box had been sold by J.C. Penney, but so many were distributed across multiple states that it was useless. The blanket was traced to a local store, but identical ones had been sold nationwide. Even his scars and injuries, which suggested years of neglect, matched too many possibilities. There was no singular thread to pull. The investigators, some of whom carried this case until the end of their careers, described it as the one that haunted them most. Imagine dedicating years to finding the truth, only to retire with nothing but unanswered questions. Some officers confessed they visited the boy's grave, leaving flowers, promising silently that they would not let him be forgotten. In a way, the case bound them to him like family. They had never known his name, but they carried his memory as if he were their own child. What separates this story from so many others in American crime history is the silence that followed. With time, media attention faded. Other stories took over headlines. America moved on. The boy in the box became a whisper, a curiosity, a footnote in crime history. But if you look deeper, this is where the tragedy sharpens into something larger than a single crime. This is a parable of invisibility. America prides itself on liberty, justice, prosperity, but for the vulnerable, the voiceless, the abused, the nameless, it has often failed. The boy in the box is not just a victim of violence, he is a victim of America's selective vision, of its ability to look away from suffering when that suffering is too small, too poor, too inconvenient. The boy was buried in a potter's field, his grave marked only with a number. For decades, he lay there, as anonymous in death as he had been in life. Then, in 1998, after years of efforts by local advocates and the Vidic Society, a Philadelphia-based group of retired detectives and forensic experts who take on cold cases, he was exhumed for DNA testing. His remains were placed in a child-sized white coffin and reburied in Ivy Hill Cemetery with a new headstone. This time, the marker read, America's Unknown Child. The inscription was simple, haunting, and true. He was no longer just the boy in the box, he was a symbol of every forgotten child. People began to visit his grave. Strangers brought flowers, toys, prayers. It was as if, decades later, America finally decided to adopt him. With modern forensics, there has been progress. In 2022, police announced they had finally identified him as Joseph Augustus Zarelli, a child born in Philadelphia. For the first time in 65 years, he had a name. But with the name came only more questions. Who killed him? Why did no one report him missing? What kind of life had he lived in those 4 or 5 short years? Even with DNA breakthroughs, the mystery has not been solved. In fact, it has only deepened. And in this strange twist lies the real lesson: technology can give us names, but it cannot give us justice. DNA can identify, but it cannot heal. For healing, a nation must choose to see, to act, to protect the most vulnerable. And so we are left with a story that is as much about today's America as it is about 1957. Consider the parallels. Even now, thousands of children vanish every year across the United States. Some are runaways, some abducted, some lost to trafficking, some killed by the very people meant to love them. Their cases rarely make national news. Their faces do not trend on social media. They vanish quietly, and unless someone fights for them, they remain invisible. The boy in the box forces us to confront this uncomfortable truth: America is still losing its children, still letting them slip away unnoticed. This is not just history. It is prophecy. The boy in the box warns us that without empathy, true, Christ-like empathy, we will continue to lose the voiceless. That without vigilance, justice will remain a slogan, not a reality. That without love for the least of these, we will repeat the same silence that allowed Joseph Zarelli to become America's unknown child. Perhaps what makes this story cut so deep is that it reminds us of our own responsibility. Each of us has a choice: to see or not to see. To notice the child next door who seems too quiet, too hungry, too afraid. To ask the questions when something doesn't feel right. To speak up when silence feels safer. Because the truth is, every forgotten child is a boy in the box. Every ignored cry is another Susquehanna Road waiting to happen. If Joseph's story has anything to teach us, it is this: justice is not just the job of police or courts. It is the calling of a people who claim to care about the future, who claim to love liberty, who claim to believe that every life is sacred. America cannot change 1957. But it can decide what kind of nation it will be in 2025. Will it be the nation that lets children vanish? Or the nation that finally listens to the silent? And so his story lingers. Haunting. Demanding. Waiting. The boy in the box is more than a case file, more than a headline, more than a crime. He is a question America has not yet answered: will we remember, or will we forget? There are parts of this story that are rarely told, perhaps because they are too human, too raw. For decades, detectives who worked on the case confessed that the boy in the box was the one victim who followed them into retirement, into their dreams, into the silence of old age. Some admitted they kept his picture on their desks long after they had moved on from the police force. One officer was said to have spent every February visiting the grave, as if to apologize that he had not done enough. Another, late in life, whispered to his family that he wished the case had been solved before he died, that the boy might finally have been granted dignity. These men and women chased leads across years and decades, not because they were told to, but because they felt they owed him that much. They had children of their own, and they could not fathom how this one child had no one. Their grief was silent but real, and it tells us something powerful: sometimes justice is not found in courtrooms or convictions, but in the refusal to forget. If the detectives felt that much pain, what of America? This is where the story turns from crime into parable. Imagine if America could speak directly to Joseph Augustus Zarelli, the child once called the boy in the box. The words might sound something like this: "Dear child, we failed you. We failed to protect you when you were alive. We failed to notice when you were hungry, bruised, crying in the night. We failed to stand between you and the hand that struck you down. And when you were gone, we failed again. We left you nameless, voiceless, faceless for 65 long years. We buried you in silence and called it closure. We did not fight hard enough, soon enough, loud enough. And yet, though we failed, we cannot escape you. Your face still looks back at us from grainy photographs. Your small frame still haunts our history. You are not just a child in a box. You are our conscience in a box. You are every neglected child, every forgotten runaway, every life that slips beneath our radar because it is easier not to see. And now, finally, we call you by your name, Joseph. Finally, we admit that you were ours all along. You were America's child, and we cannot rest until we learn to care better, to love harder, to notice sooner. Forgive us, if you can. For we cannot forgive ourselves. The boy in the box, now Joseph, stands as both tragedy and teacher. His story is America's wound, but also America's challenge. When his DNA finally yielded a name, many thought the case was over. But in truth, that was only the beginning. For his name is not just Joseph Augustus Sorelli. His name is every child in America today who is hungry, unloved, unseen. His name is every foster child shuffled between homes, every runaway who vanishes into city streets, every victim of abuse behind suburban doors. His story warns us, unless we care enough to look, to act, to refuse silence, we will keep creating new Josephs. New boxes. New graves with no names. And this is where modern America must pay attention. In 2025, the United States faces its own struggles, divisions, debates, endless arguments about what matters most. But the boy in the box reminds us that beneath the noise, the true test of a nation is how it treats its weakest. Empires are remembered not for their wealth but for their mercy, not for their skyscrapers but for their compassion. America has the technology, the resources, the reach to make sure no child is ever nameless again. The question is, does it have the will? Joseph's story lingers because it leaves us with unfinished business. His killer was never identified. His suffering was never explained. His silence was never broken. But perhaps that is why his life still matters, because it forces us to fill the silence with our own voices, to turn mystery into meaning. We cannot bring him back, but we can let him guide us toward a future where children are seen, where abuse is stopped, where justice is not optional but essential. In the end, the boy in the box was not just an unidentified victim in Philadelphia. He was, and is, America's child. His box was a coffin, but it was also a mirror. And if we dare to look into it, we will see ourselves, the choices we make, the children we notice or ignore, the nation we are becoming. His story asks us one final question: when the next child cries out in silence, will America hear, or will it look away again? Perhaps the most haunting part of this case is also the most hopeful. For all the silence, for all the failure, Joseph has never truly been forgotten. Strangers have carried him in their hearts. Detectives have whispered his name in prayers. Citizens have laid flowers on his grave. And now, through his story, millions more are beginning to know him. In this way, Joseph has done what even in life he never could: he has spoken. His small, bruised voice echoes across decades, telling America that justice is not just about the past, but about the future we choose to build. And that echo will not fade, not now, not ever. The boy in the box is no longer nameless. But whether he remains voiceless depends on us.